Welcome to Fantasy Football Today, Dynasty. I am your host, Heath Cummings, here with Dan Schneier, with Mike Cash. We've got a startup Superflex Dynasty draft for you. We're going live. We're already 3 picks in. I had the first pick. Azer had the second pick. What could go wrong? Dan, welcome back to the show, my man.
I'm so excited to be back here. I love doing this Dynasty show, Heath. It's been a little while. Last time I was on with Waldman. We talked a little pre-draft stuff. So now it's post-draft, which is always fun to see how the dice rolls out. Actually, I'm on the clock now, and so I gotta focus. You know how I am sometimes when I'm on the clock.
Well, so. I told Mike beforehand that I would try not to send it right to one of you when it was your turn to pick, and then immediately did just that. Mike, welcome to Fantasy Football Today Dynasty. Tell everybody where they can find you, where they can find your work.
Yeah, so super excited to be here. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm the co-host of the Fantasy Football RPG podcast. We combine all sorts of nerd Dungeons and Dragons stuff with the nerd fantasy football. So if you're super nerdy like me, it's a great place to be. And then I'm also an editor over at Last Word on Sports. So if you're looking for dynasty rankings, startup rankings, all things fantasy football, you can find me over there.
You know, it's funny. I was up in Memphis for the St. Jude Play It Live Summit, talking about how we can help them raise some more money. And we were the only sports people there.
Wow.
Everybody else, the biggest cheer from the crowd, and there's probably 250 people there. The biggest cheer from the crowd by far was when someone referenced Dungeons and Dragons. Perfect. I was lost completely. Never have I ever. So what are we doing today? Superflex, full PPR, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 1 regular flex, 1 Superflex. As I said, I had the first pick. I took Patrick Mahomes. Azer had the second pick. He took Josh Allen. Matt Donnelly takes CJ Stroud. Then Jalen Hurts goes. So, Dan, you come up and you just ruined the narrative. I gave you the 5th pick so that we could, I set the show up.
I almost did it.
All based around you taking Caleb Williams at pick 5 so you could justify your love for Caleb Williams. Instead, you take Lamar Jackson. So, first off, tell me why you're a fraud.
So, I am a fraud. I have taken Caleb Williams just about every single rookie mock we've done, including our 1 QB. I was between Caleb and Lamar Jackson. I would have taken Caleb over Burrow, Kyler, and Anthony Richardson, who have come after him. I have a conviction on Caleb Williams. I watched a lot of his tape, and the reason I like him so much is not just the stuff he does out of structure. I think he's actually going to be one of the best in-structure quarterbacks in the NFL. If you just focus on his base and his footwork and how his throwing motion is so compact, it works for quick game in the NFL. It didn't work as well at USC because he had a lot of jailbreak plays there, bad offensive line play. But I think they have that thing trending in the right direction in Chicago from an offensive line standpoint. And with those weapons, it's going to be, in my mind, a really good and quick game that's going to operate smooth, fast. So I am high on him. I have him as QB6, but I have to stick to the rankings. I have to stick to the board, Heath, and I do have Lamar Jackson over him.
So I do think it's interesting when you talk about that quick game, because that's the one thing that I am really interested to see. The big knock really almost on this entire quarterback class is that they held the ball forever and took way too many sacks. And so I wonder, like when you have Keenan Allen and those guys, that's not the wide receiving core for that. But you think that he's going to be just fine in structure.
Yeah, so I think that was the biggest quote-unquote knock or concern on Caleb Williams. But really what it comes down to is the NFL is a projection game. If you look at just they're going to be, it's a fool's errand in my mind because the scheme, the rules are so different at the college level with the hash marks that what you see schematically at college never really translates. So you have to really look at traits. And from a trait standpoint, he has a really good combination of lower base and upper body mechanics. They're really clean. They're the cleanest in the class. And when you do look for those, when you watch film, you do see examples of quick game. It's not like it never happened at USC. And when you did, you saw the ball out on time, really good ball placement, really good velocity. And I think that's going to work with players like Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, and obviously Rome Odunze.
So we are through 11 picks. It goes Mahomes, Allen, Stroud, Hurts, Jackson, Burrow, Kyler Murray, Caleb Williams, Anthony Richardson. I struggle with those 3 quarterbacks a lot right there. Then Justin Jefferson, then CeeDee Lamb as wide receiver 2, and that is Mike Cash making that pick. Can you make an argument, Mike, for him as the number 1 wide receiver in Dynasty, or is he a clear second for you behind Jefferson?
No, I think the argument's super easy. He had the 3rd highest fantasy points scored for a wide receiver ever. He's tied to a quarterback. However you feel about Dak, they're going to stick around or they're going to get an upgrade. So now we're talking about an elite target earner with no target competition. He's just as young as Justin Jefferson, and there's a very good case for him to be the dynasty wide receiver 1, not just in that tier.
We do have a couple of comments from the draft room chat. Matt Donnelly saying, "Hey Schneider, I can't believe you didn't go Williams. I feel like I am living in a world of lies." And Alfredo calling him a fraud. Those both seem perfectly fair to me. I'm going to move this along a little bit. The 12th pick will be Dak Prescott, and then I think like that's a good place to go. One position player, one quarterback. We'll start round 2 with Jamar Chase, and it is back to you, Mike. At this point, you're making your pick, and you just selected Justin Herbert. Did you feel like after taking a wide receiver in round 1, you had to take a quarterback there since this is a super flex league?
Yes, I feel like I was kind of backed into a corner. Picking at the 11 spot's rough because you have all of the elite quarterbacks going off the board. All of the elite wide receivers are coming. So at the 202, I needed to make sure that I had a little bit of security long term. And Justin Herbert, yeah, he's thrown to nobody's out there, but he'll be okay.
I find Justin Herbert's dynasty value in the fall and the plummet of it very confusing to me. I can understand it a little more, I guess, in redraft, though I don't really even understand it there. He's one of my favorite values. I think when Harbaugh had Andrew Luck, he threw the ball plenty at Stanford. This is the best quarterback he's had since then, from a throwing standpoint. But dynasty-wise, he's still really young. I personally, last year we were drafting him in that 5-6 range of this type of league. I don't really know why he's fallen so much. Is it just the injuries, Heath? Like, why do you think that he's kind of fallen so much value-wise?
I think because it's easy to paint the picture of why Justin Herbert was the best rookie, one of the best rookie quarterbacks ever. But it kind of feels like things have stalled out since then. And now Mike Williams is gone. Now Keenan Allen is gone. And yeah, I like Ladd McConkey a lot, but it's a pretty terrible receiving core based on the information that we know right now. What we saw from Quentin Johnston in his rookie season, Josh Palmer, a very good number 3, but good grief, he might be their number 1. And then they go Greg Roman, who wants to run the ball 600 times, and Harbaugh in combination. And I mean, we did go like 4 straight years where the Chargers were everyone's sneaky Super Bowl pick and the darling. I wonder if it's just like I made the joke the other day on FFT that I'm not going to be very high on any Panthers this year because of Miles Sanders and DJ Moore. The last 2 years have destroyed me.
Right.
I was joking, but I do think there may be some of that just from the general media that, like, man, we've said it for 4 years that these are going to be the guys. It's clear they're not going to be the guys until Mahomes is gone.
Sure. And I understand that. I also feel like it's a little bit less pronounced for me, but Trevor Lawrence, another player who fell all the way to 18th in this class. He was being drafted obviously a lot earlier last year, still just a year older from where he was at. I understand now there's the extra year and the extra layer of the disappointment, but it almost feels to me like that recency bias almost is a little weighted a little too heavily. We'll see though, because as the years go on and they're not living up to that hype, maybe it makes it less and less likely that they will reach that peak.
So let's take a look here at round 2, Mike. It starts off with Jamar Chase. Then you took Justin Herbert. Then Bijan Robinson's the first running back off the board. Is he your number 1 running back? And is this an appropriate place for the first running back?
He is my number 1 running back. I think there's a case for him, Breece Hall, or if you're trying to compete, Christian McCaffrey's a cheat code until he's not. But as we look at the board as it's falling right now, I still would have gone wide receiver or even some of the quarterbacks there. Just the longevity, and you're always just one injury away at the running back position to being nuked. So I like a couple of the other names floating around there, like even maybe a Marvin Harrison Jr., but that's okay.
Yeah, I think it's tough, Dan, and I'm trying to make this very decision right now as I come onto the clock, but it's really tough to invest an early pick in a running back, even when it's one of those guys that we just absolutely love, because we know that 2 years ago, the top 5 running backs, like one of them we still are in love with.
Right. And this is a problem that you and I run into a lot in Dynasty, Heath. And I think I'm maybe even more extreme with it than you are, because I've seen you adapt and I've seen you make picks based on value. And it's not like I'll never do it. Last year in our Bake Burger startup, I did take Breece Hall and Jahmyr Gibbs on the round 2-3. I had Josh Allen 3rd overall, and then I came back with those 2. So I will, when the value's there, I will. But I really would prefer my build in a startup to not really feature many of my major investments at the running back position, because I just see the value, just the long-term, even the short-term window. it's so much easier for me to see myself losing value if I invest a heavy asset in a running back than a receiver.
Well, and I'm going to do something that's going to drive people crazy.
There it is.
But that's kind of what I do here. My top 2 players on my board were Christian McCaffrey and Jonathan Taylor.
It's pretty sweet to have those two in Mahomes.
And I will say that, like, I wouldn't be hesitant to do this in a real startup. It's just at this point, we just flipped the switch. We're going to win this league right now. Like, we got Patrick Mahomes, we got Christian McCaffrey, we got Jonathan Taylor.
Kelce will be on this roster.
Right, we're gonna pick up Devontae Adams. We're gonna go win the league, and I can do that for the simple reason that I really enjoy the rebuild. And so I tell people all the time, you've got to know yourself, and you've got to know I'm a first or last mentality, Mike. I don't want to live in that 5th through 8th place. Yeah, maybe if I sneak into the playoffs, I'll upset somebody in round 1. What about you? How do you feel about that dichotomy? Are you trying to really make sure you're a contender or you're a rebuilder, or are you okay in the middle?
No, it's a sin to try and stay in the middle right now. So you want to either push all of the chips in, get rid of those future picks, get some really good competing vets, or you want to blow it all up and just have 100 2025 and 2026 picks, because that 2025 running back class is looking juicy. So I'm excited about the future in Dynasty right now, but if I have an opportunity to go win now, I'm going to go win my money back.
So Dan is on the clock in round 3. I'll recap round 2, and then we will get to his pick. So in round 2, we had Chase, Herbert, Bijan Robinson, Jordan Love, Jaden Daniels, and Trevor Lawrence, Marvin Harrison Jr., Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Brock Purdy, Breece Hall, Jahmyr Gibbs, Christian McCaffrey. So a run of 3 straight running backs at the end of round 2. And then I start round 3 off with Jonathan Taylor, another running back. We get Tua, Garrett Wilson, A.J. Brown, and Dan is on the clock. Dan, I thought I would talk long enough to where you would be able to tell us who you're going to take.
I am able to tell us who, but it became a bigger decision than I thought it would be, because there's 2 players that stand out like a sore thumb on my board. And I'm going to end up going with the player that I have a strong conviction on. Anyone who followed me during draft season knows this. And it's Drake May, the quarterback who was drafted to the Patriots. We just found out he's going to compete for the starting job in year 1. That doesn't surprise me. I never found him be the project others did. To me, he was the quarterback 2 for me in this class, and closer to quarterback 1 than quarterback 3 when I watched the tape of him versus Jaden Daniels. More red flags in Daniels' games moving forward. I love his arm talent. Drake May, I love his ability to create outside of structure, and I love his athleticism. 7 rushing touchdowns and 700 yards rushing as a freshman in the ACC. So I think he's going to be one of those like Allen red zone type runners who gets you some extra points with some touchdowns in the red zone, maybe 4, 5, 6 a year rushing. I understand people are scared of the landing spot in New England. I get it. But they did kind of just build out everything from this draft class on offense for him. I mean, they got him 2 receivers. Polk fits his skill set perfectly. And if you watch the 2022 tape of Washington, which I did to go back and scout Michael Penix, Polk was actually at times better than Odunze in 2022. And then he played hurt in 2023. So it's just something that is intriguing me. Now, the other player that just went off the board is a player I was debating between him and Malik Neighbors. I feel like pick 32 overall is really good value for Neighbors in a startup. I have him probably closer to my 13th, 14th, 15th best player in a startup. So it was close from a value standpoint, but I went with the quarterback I have a conviction on, and I feel good about having 2 quarterbacks in this format.
Yeah, if anything, with my win now approach, that's the problem, is that I only got 1 quarterback in the first 3 rounds. But generally speaking, and we'll see how this draft goes, you see in a dynasty startup, those veteran quarterbacks that people aren't sure how many years they're going to play are still available late. And so I do think that we may see some of those guys. I'm talking an Aaron Rodgers, a Russell Wilson, a Kirk Cousins, a Matthew Stafford. I think you're going to see multiple of those guys make it into round 5 or beyond. I think we just saw Mike make his most recent pick in round 3. You take Drake London. He's got 2 quarterbacks. He went from having no quarterbacks. Now he's got 2 quarterbacks. What do you think, would you compare London to the wide receivers in this class? We saw Harrison and Neighbors both go before London. We have not seen Rome Odunze go yet, I don't believe. So London basically going as wide receiver 3 in this class. Is that where you'd put him?
Yep, I would put him pretty comfortably in front of Odunze, but I actually think he can compete with Neighbors as far as landing spot and immediate impact. He's going off the board in best ball like as a wide receiver 1. If you take Kirk Cousins' attempts and extrapolate that with what Drake London's target competition has been, like Drake London is going to eat in this offense, and whether it's him or even if Penix comes in and steals the job, Penix throws a great contested ball.
Yeah.
And Drake London's best skill set is just being a big body receiver that can make something happen after the catch. So
That
I
really
love
is
getting
a
the value
great
here.
point, by the way, Mike. That is an excellent point about it. Like, if Penix does play sooner than we expect, and who knows, like that's not the expectation, but you never know. There's a 2-year out in that contract. He does really fit London's skill set almost perfectly with those outside. Like if you just watch Rome Odunze, London can do a lot of what Odunze did. And there were a lot of times where Penix just kind of threw those balls outside the numbers and put it up there, contested catches, and gave his receiver a chance to make a play, and he did.
Let's take our first break, and after that, I will recap round 3.
We need your sports news anywhere.
We've got breaking news to bring you.
Then get your sports anytime you want them. Big trade news overnight to discuss.
Because we know you need sports all the time.
A lot of movement in the rankings this week.
A legend adds to their legacy.
We're bringing you that breaking news right here on HQ.
CBS Sports HQ, anywhere, anytime, all the time.
So I started round 3 off with Jonathan Taylor, followed by Tua Tagovailoa, Garrett Wilson, A.J. Brown, Drake May, Puka Nacua, Saquon Barkley, Malik Neighbors, Brandon Ayuk. We got Sam Laporta, Drake London, and then Tyreek Hill. Dan, how do you place Tyreek Hill? And is he one of those wide receivers that if you draft him now, you know you're in win now?
I think you are in win now when you draft him. I think he even said before last year he doesn't plan to play too many more seasons. I think he put a number on. I don't remember if it was 2 or 3. That could obviously change if the Dolphins start to, get closer to the Super Bowl, or if he feels like he can get another contract that's big. But I do put him in the boat of maybe not a Cooper Kupp, Travis Kelce, not in that range, but just the next tier of you are in win now when you're drafting a player like this.
Yeah, I think you have to look at it as a win now. Do you think about that when you're in the draft process, Mike, or are you just kind of going down your draft board and taking the best available player?
In the first 5 rounds, I'm definitely just taking best available player. I'm trying to get all the value that I can. But after those first 5 rounds, you can kind of see what your team is built out as. And now all of a sudden you're like, okay, let me go get some crusty running backs. This team's ready to compete now. Or you go grab some younger, hopefully taking a step forward players if you're going to a rebuild. So first couple rounds, let the draft come to me, kind of enjoy how it's going. And then after that, really chase the team build.
I like that idea. Is like you don't want to spend an asset in the first 4 or 5 rounds that's like you're never getting that type of value again unless you have an early pick on a specific strategy. You want to go get the best player, which is what I think I'm going to do here. Dan, you made, I don't know if it was a joke or a reference to the fact that I was going to definitely have Travis Kelce on this roster. Well, you're wrong, because Mark Andrews at the end of round 4 is still available. And I definitely prefer Mark Andrews to Travis Kelce in a dynasty league, but he's also a bit of a win now tight end. Yeah. So we saw Trey McBride go in the middle of round 4. I was thankful to get Andrews at the end of round 4. And now this is where like it really hits the I don't know if the correct way to say it, but I have one quarterback I'm picking and won't pick again for 24 picks. You've got Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, J.J. McCarthy, Kirk Cousins, Matthew Stafford. I think I might go out on a limb here, and I'm going to take J.J. McCarthy. And I want your thoughts on this, Mike, because he was not ahead of Drake May for me before the NFL draft. But I see just a massive difference between landing in Minnesota with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson, and an offensive game plan that wants to throw the ball 650 times, and landing in New England where I have no idea what their offensive philosophy is or who their top 3 wide receivers are.
Yep. When we talk about like nature versus nurture for quarterbacks, it's a big discussion to have. If nurture is real, JJ McCarthy is going to be elite for Dynasty for a couple of years here. He's landing in a great landing spot. He has all of the tools in his toolbox, but it's going to be hilarious watching him go from a Harbaugh offense where he famously threw 9 passes in a game, over to Kevin O'Connell, where they're just slinging it all the time. So I'm excited to see the steps forward that he can take and if he can use his tools to become the quarterback we want him to be. But I believe in him, and there's a film study up on our channel where I just rave about what McCarthy can do.
Yeah, I think that's the mystery of it, right, Dan? Is there was such a small sample size that both didn't have enough reps on tape to have like those surefire he has these traits, and also we didn't see enough mistakes because he was so well protected in that offensive environment and with the talent around him and with 17 rush attempts per drive.
Well, I'll say this. I did the film study on JJ McCarthy. I wrote up our draft profile for him. And when we do it like a month before the draft, Dave and I you have to do your best fantasy fits. And the one I picked was I picked Minnesota Vikings. And I said, if he can get into any of these McVay tree systems, it's the perfect fit for his skill set. This is exactly what he needed to really, in my opinion, like bring out the best in his skill set. I have probably a few more concerns than Mike does with his skill set. The arm talent to me, while he has very good velocity in the short and intermediate area, which I think is why he's such a perfect fit for Kevin O'Connell, the deep half does concern me. Throwing to his left does concern me. There seems to be just when he's a little bit of overstriding when throwing to his left, and it feels like he has to put a lot into it. And on the deep half, there are some passes that I think he won't get away with at the NFL level that he got away with a little bit at Michigan. But there are some undeniable traits on his film. I think he's a better athlete than people realize. He had a sub-7.3 cone, which is phenomenal. Former hockey player. I think he's one of the best in class at throwing on the run, specifically on the run to the right, on the roll to the right, but still the accuracy and the velocity you can put on the pass when he's on the move to the right. Those are the type of things that can help you. Like if you're playing fantasy and you're watching these third down situations that the Vikings get into, which by the way, he was the best third down quarterback, I think analytics wise of all of anyone in this class. You're going to see Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison playing a little getting open outside of structure, and he's going to get them the football, and he's going to continue those drives. So I am excited about the fit and more excited. This was the best possible place for him.
Now, that time it wasn't my fault, Dan. I went to you like 4 picks away from you, and you just talked until it was almost too late for you to make a pick. That's okay. It is fantastic stuff. Let's recap round 4 here, and I've got a question for you, Mike. So Travis Etienne starts off round 4, then Jared Goff, then Achane, Chris Olave, Rome Odunze, DJ Moore. So Odunze 1 spot ahead of Moore. Then Trey McBride, Jalen Waddle, Kyron Williams, Michael Pittman, Nico Collins, Mark Andrews is how I finished up round 4. So Achane is someone, Mike, who was a first-round pick before the NFL draft in some places, a second-round pick almost for sure. And it seems like he's kind of lost some luster. People concerned about the Jalen Wright pick or just recognizing maybe that the Dolphins don't see him as a feature back. How do you value Achane in Dynasty?
Yep. So he's outside of my top 5 or 6 running backs right now. When we look at what he's good at, he's hyper efficient. He plays in a system that's going to continue to make him hyper efficient. But I'm just worried about it's going to turn into a 3-headed monster where it's Wright sometimes, it's Mostert sometimes. Like Mostert, yes, he's 100 years old, but he's led the league in touchdowns last year. So I understand why people are cooling on Achane, but in best ball, he's a great target. In redraft and Dynasty, it's going to be hard to know what weeks to play him.
Dan, we saw a couple of wide receivers go here at the end of round 4. Jalen Waddle, Michael Pittman, Nico Collins. I don't know that we know for sure. Like Waddle's the clear number 2. Pittman's the clear number 1. I don't know if we have any idea if Nico is the 1, the 2, or the 3 in this Texans offense. I was kind of leaning towards Nico as the 1, and I saw the CJ Stroud clip where he got to put together like his fantasy offense on the field, and it was Tank Dell and it wasn't Nico, and so now Tank Dell's the number 1.
That narrative street put me in cycles as well, Heath. When I saw that, I was like, oh boy, how am I going to get this narrative out of my head that CJ Stroud's building his perfect team and he takes Tank Dell over Nico?
So how do you value those 3 wide receivers in Dynasty, Waddle, Pittman, and Nico? And do you think they're basically all in the same range? Is it basically flip a 3-headed coin?
No, it's not a 3-headed coin for me. I really, for Dynasty, it's a lot. The way I view it is a lot based on just talent and projection. I think that Waddle is clearly the best receiver of those three by a considerable margin in his ability to make big plays after the catch, make big plays in the vertical plane. These are two ways to score fantasy points, long touchdowns or just yards after the catch. He's a more explosive prospect by far than them. Now they have other aspects of their game that are good. Pittman specifically is a big target, good hands, catches away from frame, has Anthony Richardson. These are all things I like, but I don't trust the consistency for either of those two. Nico I'd probably have them really tiered down. Nico has fallen, not just because of that narrative. I really like Tank Dell's tape out of Houston, and then he goes over to the NFL and really translates immediately 1-to-1. Plus, he had another player in the mix there with Diggs. So I would say they'd be in almost different tiers for me, with Waddle clearly ahead of the other two.
Let's take a look at round 5 here, Mike. I started it off with J.J. McCarthy, then Ken Walker goes, then Kyle Pitts, James Cook, Dalton Kincaid, T. Higgins, Deshaun Watson, Brock Bowers, Devontae Smith, Rashad White, DK Metcalf, and Bryce Young. I like that Bryce Young pick at the end of round 5. I think he is certainly undervalued, and I have he and McCarthy basically back to back. But I want to talk about the tight ends in this round, Mike. So we have Kyle Pitts, Dalton Kincaid, and Brock Bowers all going in the same round. That seems to make perfect sense to me.
Yep.
But I don't know that I have a strong opinion on which one of these three is going to be better. Do you agree all three of them should kind of be in the same round, the same tier, and do you have a strong preference?
Yes, I agree that they should all be in the same range. It's funny, we look at like years and years, it's been Travis Kelce and then everybody else. And now we have a batch of 6 or 7 tight ends that you have an argument you can make them the Dynasty tight end 1. Same thing that I was saying about London earlier. You take Kyle Pitts, you take his target earning, and you apply that to Kirk Cousins, all of a sudden you have the tight end 1 in fantasy. You take Dalton Kincaid, whether or not you believe in vacated targets, and now you take Diggs targets, sprinkle a couple of those on Kincaid, now you have the tight end 1. Like when you're looking at all of these players, Brock Bowers, a unicorn of a prospect. I love all of them, and I think the order they went in probably makes sense, but it's tough to bet on talent over situation when it's a Raiders player.
Yeah, Dan. I mean, we basically, I think, see maybe Bowers walking into what we've seen the last few years for Kyle Pitts. Like, it's not difficult at all for me to look at Bowers and project 3 years from now. We're saying, well, we know he's elite. We know he's a great player. We're just waiting for the situation to be good.
I think that's an excellent point. And it even goes like really more micro, right? Like they have Michael Mayer there as well. There could be a situation where we could be like, what the hell? Brock Bowers is playing 60% of the snaps this game. What happened here? And they're like, well, the game plan was we're run heavy and we're up 13-10 the whole game. And, we don't need it. And it's like, what? You always need Bowers on the field. Same arguments we had for Kyle Pitts. Now, the one difference I would say is, and it's not a difference, but the Raiders do feel like they have less competition to compete for at quarterback going into the 2025 market because 6 teams use first-round picks on quarterback. So those teams are not going to go back to the market for a quarterback this next offseason. That's just not how it goes. I mean, it's possible. The Cardinals did it a few years ago with Josh Rosen and Kyler Murray, but it's very rare. So I think that does work a little bit more in the favor of Bowers, like the assumption that there could be a quarterback upgrade as soon as next year. But that's just an assumption. In the NFL, you can never really assume that you're going to definitely get an upgrade at that position because we've seen where that can go. So
Mike, how do you view, like, when we're looking at these prospects and we're talking about situation, specifically year 1 situation? I think you put Bowers in that group. You could put Rome Odunze in that group, not for a different reason, not because of a quarterback concern, but because DJ Moore and Keenan Allen are there. You can definitely, in my opinion, put Malik Neighbors in that group because he has Daniel Jones as his quarterback right now. And the thing that bothers me more about the Raiders and the Giants situations is I don't think they currently have head coaches who are going to preside over a season in which they get a top 5 pick. I think like they are going to, especially for Dable this year, like he needs to win probably 8 games, I would guess. And Antonio Pierce, like you listen to that guy talk, they are not going to give up anything. And so I'm a little bit worried that both these teams end up around pick 10 to 12 next year.
I 100% agree with that. And then we're looking at the quarterback class in 2025. 2024, we were hot and bothered by Caleb Williams. Drake May had an argument to be the quarterback 1 in most classes. 2025, we're looking at Quinn Ewers, Carson Beck, Shadur Sand, like the
You're
name.
make Dan cry.
I know. So the crop of quarterbacks is worse. So maybe if they're not in the top 5, they're still going to be able to grab a first-round quarterback with a little bit of fun. But it's not nearly the same crop of players, and I'm worried for both of those players long term.
It's fair.
Yeah, and I think if I got what you were saying there, and I would agree with it, it's that we're more worried about the lack of a quarterback or the terrible offensive environment than we are about older players at their same position in their way. If they're good enough, the guys who are in their way will get out of their way. But you might not be good enough to overcome Daniel Jones.
Nobody is.
Let's recap round 6 here. We are moving right along. I've got some professional mock drafters here. Joe Mixon goes with the first pick of round 6. George Pickens, Mike. I missed that one. I like that pick. Second pick of round 6, followed by Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams. We've got the elder wide receivers. Save some for me, please. Isaiah Pacheco, Josh Jacobs, Zay Flowers. Dan, you took Tank Dell. I like both of your picks in round 6. Deebo Samuel, Will Levis, another guy I think is probably undervalued. And then we get Stephon Diggs, and I took Mike Evans, maybe one of the more predictable picks of the draft with my win now squad at the end of round 6. So when you talk about those elder wide receivers, Dan, Mike Evans, Stephon Diggs, Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp, do you have a preference between those guys? Are you okay with round 6 of a startup where those guys start to come off the board?
I'm somewhat okay with it. I think it depends on my build. This is really when it comes into play because look, the players that are coming off the board in that range are also Brian Thomas and Xavier Worthy and some, first round picks drafted to Trevor Lawrence and Patrick Mahomes. This is value to me from a long-term standpoint, at least in my mind, and who knows if that'll be realized, that you're passing up. So there is still an opportunity cost. So if I'm building to win now, then I'm great with those picks. If I'm in a position like my team, for example, where I have Lamar Jackson and Drake May and a bunch of other young players, I'm not probably going in that direction. I'd rather go for my rookie like I did with Xavier Worthy.
So let's talk about build a little bit, Dan, because you're 7 rounds into your team. You have Lamar Jackson and Drake May at quarterback, as you mentioned. At wide receiver, you have Jalen Waddle, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Tank Dell, Xavier Worthy, a spectacular wide receiver core. You have Dalton Kincaid at tight end. You have absolutely nothing at running back. Are you addressing that need anytime soon, or are you just going to keep stockpiling young wide receivers?
If the right running back falls to me and he's going to have to be young, I will be doing that. But if not, I'm fine to keep stockpiling receivers or tight end or get a quarterback if those positions. This, Heath, from doing this long enough with me, I'm very anti running back in Dynasty. I don't really understand the position. I don't see it. It never holds value to me. It changes so much year to year as far as where we rank them. And I just think I'm playing a fool's game by trying to get, like, for example, if you had invested last year in a Dynasty startup, some of these you still be fine on, right? Breece Hall, Jahmyr Gibbs, you're fine there. But there were other players that we were taking at this point last year at the running back position that at this point, round 7, round 8, where we're at, have lost all value whatsoever. And we're going to be able to get them, 6, 7 rounds later. I still feel like I'm giving up opportunity costs at receiver. There's still, until I get to that point of receiver where I really don't feel like there's any kind of long-term, or even, let's not say long-term, let's say like mid-term value that I can hold by drafting them. I'm not going to pass up on them because I know that I can trade them for more later than I can trade this running back for.
Dan is back on the clock, Mike, so we'll take a look at your team. You have Justin Herbert and Jared Goff at quarterback, another good duo. At wide receiver, you've got CeeDee Lamb, Drake London, DK Metcalf, and George Pickens, absolutely stacked there. Evan Ingram at tight end. Dan likes him because he used to play for the Giants. And then Alvin Kamara is your only running back. How do you feel about this build? Where are you looking to go next?
Yep. So it's tough to say this because I know the other drafters are listening, but I look at this roster and I see a team that could possibly compete in 2024. So maybe I'm going to go grab a running back that can help me now. Maybe I'm going to grab one that can help me for a couple of years. Or if the wide receiver and tight end volume keeps falling the way that it is, I'm looking at my queue. There's some fun names left at wide receiver still.
So let's do that round 7 recap here. I'll read off the names, Dan, and you tell me what stands out to you. Calvin Ridley, Travis Kelce, and Jordan Addison to start the round. Then Ladd McConkey, Xavier Worthy, and Jonathan Brooks. Amari Cooper, Brian Thomas, and Kirk Cousins. Bo Nix, Alvin Kamara, and Zamir White. What stands out to you, Dan?
I'm going to say what stands out to me, and then I want to talk about a little 30,000-foot view dynasty stuff with you right after that, Heath, because an interesting conversation happened in the chat that I want to get your take on. But first, I'll say what stands out to me. Love Bo Nix there. I love the idea of drafting a quarterback this late that has the upside to start right away. A coach that handpicked him is going to have a lot of the situation around him that he needs. We'll see if he can. Obviously, he brings in Troy Franklin, a receiver he's a great rapport with. We'll see if that can carry over. So that stands out to me first. Zamir White stands out to me. I feel like he's a really interesting dynasty piece at this point. I think he's one of those players that I'm discussing earlier, Heath, where there's a possibility in my head where we could be doing this next year and he's not even drafted until the last round, if anything at all. So those are the type of players that kind of scare me. And that brings me to the debate that I want to have with you both, because Josh said in the chat after, our discussion that he said, yeah, value is great and you should be looking for value in dynasty, but you need good running backs to win the championship. And I said to that, I understand that, but in my opinion, you can always trade for running backs in dynasty. I said sometimes, and in some of my leagues, I've even traded round 2, 3 picks for some of the older ones who are producing. And Alfredo said, yep, you can even find sometimes running backs on waivers or on your bench. What are your thoughts on that idea of kind of, and then Josh is counter to that is, in theory, I understand, but in my years of playing and winning, I generally want to have workhorse running backs. Even if they lose value over time, it's worth it.
Tell Danny's wrong, Mike. No.
Yeah. I would love to tell him that he's wrong, but it's tough. You hit week 4, week 5 of the in-season playing, and you find that team that's 0-4, 0-5, and you're like, hey,
right.
You have Alvin Kamara hiding on your bench. Hey, you have Derrick Henry hiding on your bench. James Conner, Nick Chubb, whoever you want to talk about there. And you're just like, let me give you a 2. It'll help your team long-term. I'm going to go win the championship.
And they're taking that too almost every time, I feel like.
Yep. And as we look at that 2017 class, it was so loaded. We've been saying for years, they're going to fall off a cliff. They're going to fall off a cliff. They're going to fall off a cliff. They haven't yet, and we can just continue to go grab them for 2s, and I'm very comfortable with doing that.
I think, and that's the complicating factor, and I think this does vary by league.
Yeah.
It's not always that easy to go get a good, like, we're not talking about trying to go pick up Devin Singletary for a 2.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's not always that easy to go get a good running back, a must-start running back for a second-round pick. Especially because if I'm in the position to be making that offer to trade for a must-start running back, I'm probably really good. Like, I probably have a really good team. So that guy's looking at my pick and saying, oh, I'm trading Derrick Henry for the 23rd pick in the rookie draft. I think I'll just see if I can get one more year of Derrick Henry.
I get the feeling though in those spots that is fair, but sometimes those teams that at least what I've come into, those are the types of teams that are really far behind, Heath, and they're not really even thinking about competing this year or next. And as they try to shop around, like, oh, we can get a better offer. They don't get the better offer, and they come back to you, and maybe you throw in an extra pick, but oh, damn it, I wanted DeAndre Swift so bad there. I feel like
Me too.
Value pick 100. I almost took him the past 2 rounds.
Same.
That hurts because now that was my basically only running back strategy was take DeAndre Swift there.
And so let's go to that right there, because he was available last round. You were going through round 8.
Yeah.
And DeAndre Swift was there for the taking. And you chose Rashee Rice.
Yes.
Which, we were just talking about not wanting to draft running backs because the value might disappear next year. The value on the Rashee Rice pick might literally disappear in 5 minutes.
Well, people say that, but what do you think is going on here? You think he's going to get cut? This is the thing I don't understand. Hold on. Can you give me a quick reset of the clock since we're talking? Just one.
Just one reset, Dan. I've already given multiple resets. It's okay. It's okay. I don't think we know. Like, you go ahead and make your pick, and I'll say.
I'm going to take a weird one here.
Because I am slowly moving Rice down both in redraft and in Dynasty. I don't think we have any idea, honestly, what's going on. I do think the way that he succeeded last year is at least a little bit, should produce a little bit of skepticism. It was a unique role with Andy Reid and with Patrick Mahomes. And then they went and add Marquise Brown and draft a wide receiver in the first round. And then he has multiple off the field instances. So if a guy was going to disappear after a great rookie year, those seem like the types of circumstances that would lead up towards that.
I can see that. I could also see the situation being the suspension isn't what everybody's projecting at the moment. It's a few games and we never hear about it again, because the second off-field incident that happens with a lot of players throughout, and I've seen even worse stuff that kind of gets just thrown under the rug. I'm not as worried about that. The production part is the interesting one to me, Heath, just because I think about it, like, you're right. A lot of what he did production-wise was PPR based. It was those quick throws around line of scrimmage. It was essentially what you're saying, which is the Chiefs offense maybe adapting to what they had with them at that point. Now, what do they have with them? They have Xavier Worthy, a 4.22 athlete. They have Marquise Brown, a 4.3 athlete. That means maybe the scheme can change. They can go back to what they were doing with Tyreek Hill, which is kind of the whole idea of it, which is Reed does this, Sean Payton does this. It's the knife in the defense theory. You have these guys running these sprints, as some people like to call them, to open up the middle of the field and create that space, and have the defense have the safeties play a little higher. All that could happen, but at the same time, you could still, in my mind, have Rashee Rice operating underneath in that system, because there's going to be even more space. Plus, when I watched the tape of Rashee Rice, I know we talked about this maybe on one Dynasty show last year, Heath, or maybe offline, but there were some moments on Rashee Rice's tape. I'm forgetting the game now. It was in a dome, might have been Atlanta or something like that, where he ran like the full route tree, and he ran it really well. Mahomes was throwing him back shoulders. There was an out and up. There were double moves, and it looked like to me like it was going to start to expand. It didn't actually happen last year, but I still think he's young enough where he could expand to become a complete wide receiver with his skill set. So I feel like at that pick, what was it, pick 90 or something, I'm betting on a really good talent paired with Mahomes.
So I will just, this is my last counterpoint, and I don't want to be the anti-Rice guy.
It's fine.
But I will just say, like, yards per reception for Juju Smith-Schuster the last 4 years, 8.6, 8.6, 12, 9.
That was the 12 Mahomes here.
Yards per target the last 4 years, 6.5, 4.6, 9.2, 5.5. Yards per game the last 3 years, 25.8, 58.3, 23.6. So yes, that is my concern, because that's a lot of what Rice did was similar to what, now it wasn't all, but there was some similarities there to what Juju did. But we need to get back on track. Let's recap round
Josh said
8.
Heath is going keto the way he's staying away from Rice.
He has had some spectacular Rice jokes over the last couple of weeks. If you follow at JB Cho Knows on Twitter. Let's take a quick break, and then we will finish up our recap of the draft.
The best couch potatoes come from Pluto TV country.
And these taters, they like all sorts of different things.
Survivor Channel, Ink Master Channel.
If it's got a spaceship in it, I'm probably watching it.
3 channels dedicated to CSI.
Whatever mood you're in, it's going to be easy watching.
So round 8 starts off with David Montgomery, Evan Ingram, Baker Mayfield, Trey Benson, TJ Hawkinson, Deontay Johnson, JSN falling all the way to pick 91, then Rashee Rice, then Jaden Reed, Marquise Brown, Terry McLaurin, and I take Aaron Rodgers. My compliment to JJ McCarthy. He's not going to be mad at all that McCarthy's sitting on the bench behind him on my team. Dan, is this the right spot to start looking at those veteran quarterbacks that you might only get 1 or 2 years left, but we think they can be, especially in a Superflex league, very useful this year?
Yes, I think this is a good range for it. I think, honestly, the way the quarterbacks have been drafted in this class, I feel like there's been good value at all spots for the different types of quarterbacks. You take the chances on the Bo Nix. I thought that was good value. Deshaun Watson fell really far in this draft, which is just interesting considering where he was going last year. There's just so little helium left in that balloon for Deshaun Watson, but He still has the contract. He still has a team that, at least on paper, has built around him and doesn't really have any kind of solution at quarterback. So it's not like they're a win now team. It's not like they're going to be in the mix for a quarterback. So I think they'll stick with him longer than people maybe assume. Deshaun Watson, assuming he can come back from that injury, who knows? Again, it's throwing shoulder.
Right. So you're on the clock again, Dan. Mike, we've got
let's do this.
Jackson Smith and Jigba, the number 1 wide receiver from last year's class. Now the 91st pick here. I don't think he's a top 20 wide receiver in anybody's Dynasty wide receiver rankings. I guess first, do you have any hope for him? And second, why isn't this same exact thing going to happen to Rome Odunze?
I'll answer the second question first because I think it's easier. Rome Odunze is a better player.
Okay.
So that just checks the box right away. Keenan Allen is older than Lockett, if I remember correctly. already has an injury history and he's only on a 1-year deal. The year is going to be 2035, and we're still saying, Tyler Lockett, he's going to be washed up, and he's still going to end up being the wide receiver 30 on a couple of deep balls. So I just think he's stuck in a weird wide receiver room, and I could definitely see this happening with the Dunze. Dynasty managers, as much as we pretend like we're forward focused and we're really ready for the future, you've 1 bad year as a rookie, all of a sudden you tank down the rankings. So I can see the path where Dunze ends up getting buried a little bit, but I have hope for both. I have more hope for Odunze.
Do you agree with that, Dan, that Odunze is a better player than JSN?
I think he's considerably better prospect than JSN from my film study. I feel like they're different because obviously JSN's calling card is he had Julian Edelman-esque 3-cone and short shuttle. That's change of direction, and you could see it. I still think he's in a bad fit for the system-wise. Maybe it's going to change a little bit because they're bringing in a new coordinator, and I hope it changes a bit, but I just don't love it. But Rome Odunze to me is a much more complete prospect, bigger prospect, better at the catch point, it wins better vertically, runs better vertical routes, wins at different all areas of the field. To me, Rome Odunze is considerably better prospect.
We are getting close to the end of this podcast, not quite close to the end of the draft, but I do want to at least recap round 9 and round 10 here, Mike. And I know we're getting close to Dan's pick, so I'll go to you for round 9. Starts off with Christian Kirk, who was my pick, then Tony Pollard and Javonte Williams and DeAndre Swift and Derrick Henry, a run of running backs there. Matthew Stafford, George Kittle, Keon Coleman, I'd certainly considered him, James Conner, Chris Godwin, David Njoku, and Ricky Pearsall. Those were the last pick of round 9. So we get some veteran running backs, Tony Pollard, DeAndre Swift, Javonte Williams, Derrick Henry, James Conner, all go in round 9. Javonte is the one for me that stands out. One of those guys like Dan was talking about that just a couple of, not quite months, but definitely a year ago, Javonte was a top 10 dynasty running back.
Right.
At one point, probably 18 months ago, he was a top 5 dynasty running back. He's still young. I think 23 or 24 years old. I still have hope that Javonte Williams is going to have one of those great classic Sean Payton running back seasons this year and regain a lot of that value. Do you?
100%. It's the year after the ACL tear. We need to give him a little time and a little grace as he's moving through a complex knee tear. And really, you look at a rookie quarterback who's going to want to check it down. We saw what Bucky Irving was able to do with Bo Nix. Now, no Jerry Jeudy. There's just all of these things that should get you excited about Denver right now. And worst case scenario, you can just draft Audric Estime if you don't believe in Javonte Williams, because both of them are very good rushers.
I would say he will be taken before this draft is over. Dan, we'll move on to you for the round 10 breakdown. And this is where the pickings do start to get a little bit slim. Like, the nice thing about dynasty leagues, you can feel better about your picks longer because you can take rookies that aren't going to be any good at all this year and still justify it because they'll be good one day. But we get to round 10. It starts off with Jahan Dotson. There's Najee Harris, a bit of a surprise. Good pick, Mike. Daniel Jones. That's why I went to Dan in this round. Tyjae Spears, Ramondre Stevenson, Christian Watson, Geno Smith, Aaron Jones, Michael Penix, Keenan Allen, Derek Carr, Cortland Sutton. So like I said, the pickings do get slim. Do you like, when you look at this, like the quarterbacks that go are Daniel Jones, Geno Smith, Penix, and Carr? The running backs that we go off the board are Najee Harris, Aaron Jones, and that's it. And then at wide receiver, it's Dotson. Oh, he's got Stevenson too. Dotson, Watson, Keenan Allen, Cortland Sutton. Is there a position here that you like the value better?
I still think receiver is probably the highest upside position here. I mean, look, Christian Watson, for example, we're getting him pick 113. What was that pick? Mm-hmm. Christian Watson in the teens, 100 teens. We're pairing him with a quarterback who just took a breakout, still really young, and Christian Watson is still one of the most is the most talented receiver in that Green Bay group. He may not be the best because I really like some of the film I've seen of Wicks and Dobbs gets open. I mean, Jaden Reed, they're all really good. But Watson still is the biggest and the fastest and still has the most explosive play upside. So I think getting him this late is a really good value there. He stands out. Penix is the one that's the most interesting to me because obviously it seems on paper in my mind like good value, but I struggle to see the long-term, like outside of just maybe having somebody who starts football games. I wasn't a big fan of Penix as a prospect, translating from college to the NFL. And he'll be, 28, 29 maybe by the time he starts. Maybe they get out of that Cousins contract in 2 years, potentially. But either way, he doesn't run at all. I know he ran the 4.58, which is fake to me. I mean, you watch his tape and there's no examples of scrambles. There's no rushing yards at the college level. It's not going to happen at the NFL level in my mind. So it's just a pocket passer. And so I see kind of a capped upside there. So I don't really find him to be the value everybody else does in that spot. So I think at this point, you're almost kind of throwing out picks at the quarterback position. So that's probably the last place I would go.
Well, I mean, Daniel Jones went, but after Daniel Jones, then
it's another
nothing
pick thrown out.
Nothing certain left after that. Let's see here. I think, Mike, let's take one last look at your team, because you've now made 12 picks. That your team is mostly put together. So at quarterback, you have Justin Herbert, you have Jared Goff, you have Justin Fields, plenty of upside there. At running back, Alvin Kamara, Najee Harris, and that is it. At wide receiver, it's Lamb, it's London, it's Metcalf, it's Pickens. You mentioned Tyler Lockett. You drafted him as well. And then you have both Evan Ingram and David Njoku. Did this draft work out just about like you'd planned?
I mean, I really wish I was able to get into the top tier of quarterbacks, but Justin Herbert and Jared Goff are great. And then, look, I'm a Steelers fan. It's going to be week 3, and we're all going to be chanting for Justin Fields if Russell Wilson goes 3 and out. So I think there's a world where Justin Fields has a little bit of a rebirth, and it's nice to have a bench quarterback that, when he's playing, you start him for fantasy. When he's not playing, you don't. And it's as clear as day there.
I agree with that. I want to give you another chance because you said the Steelers connection, and you and I took the 2 Steelers backs. You took Najee. Yep. I took Jaylen Warren. Last year, we saw Najee had the bigger role, but Warren was really, for most of the year, better for fantasy football purposes. Do you think that's going to change this year in Arthur Smith's system, or do you think we're still going to see both of them kind of as low-end number 2 running backs flip a coin as to who's better each week?
Yep, it's going to be a gross 60-40 split where Harris is getting the goal line carries, the in-between the 20s work, and a couple of passes. And then Jaylen Warren's getting the PPR machine, and he will break off a couple more explosive plays because that's his role. I just think the offense as a whole is going to move forward. You can't get worse than Matt Canada and Kenny Pickett. I'm going to be saying that. And then next year I'll say it can't get worse than Russell Wilson and Arthur Smith. And then the year after I'll say it can't get worse than whoever it is then. But I just have irrational hope that the offense is going to be better and it will elevate Harris's touchdown percentage.
Dan, you're also 12 picks in, so I'm going to give you one more look at your roster. You've got Lamar Jackson, Drake May, no QB3. So I don't know who you're starting. I guess you can still get Jacoby Brissett to start week 1. You've got Derrick Henry, Aaron Jones, the oldest, Zach Charbonnet, Marshawn Lloyd. So not that old, but the starters
getting younger, but the starters are old.
Right. And then at wide receiver, it's Waddle, it's Dell, it's ARSB. I should say him first. I'm on Ross St. Brown first. Xavier Worthy, Rashee Rice, with Dalton Kincaid as your tight end. Is this a win now team or a play for the future team?
This is kind of, we always ask this question. We've done this every year. My answer is always the same. And I think ultimately when I say it's kind of both, I think as I've looked back, Heath, and I've kind of reflected on those teams and how they've gone, it is more future than win now. Because those teams that I think are maybe in the win now mode, maybe they can win now. No, they've tended to need a year or 2 of seasoning. And I think this is a good example of a team that probably needs a year or 2. But I did draft those 2 backs, those veterans, in addition to my younger backs, I should say, with the idea of maybe if things are going right, I can compete for this year. I kind of see how it plays out.
So here, let me just, I'll finish up by telling you the team that you'll be competing against this year. I have Patrick Mahomes and Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, Christian McCaffrey and Jonathan Taylor at running back. Mark Andrews is my starting tight end. My wide receivers are Mike Evans, Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk, Cortland Sutton. And then with my round 12 and 13 pick, did the double dip on the Broncos with Marvin Mims and Troy Franklin. I guess I have all 3 Broncos wide receivers. What could go wrong there?
Heath, I did want to ask you, so when we're looking at this build, a lot of times we talk about building around quarterbacks and wide receivers, but it seems for this, you kind of punted on wide receiver to take running back and maybe quarterback and tight end a little earlier. Do you feel skeevy about your wide receiver room right now, or how do you feel?
I don't for year 1. There's a reason I just took Franklin and Mims, and like every pick I make the rest of this draft might be cheap young wide receivers that I hope turn into something. I'm a bigger fan. I've come to know, and if Mike's on the clock here, Dan, so I will finish with a little bit on Calvin Ridley. I was pretty down on him going into Jacksonville, coming off of the layoff last year. I thought we saw a lot of rust early in the season. Couldn't seem to remember where the out of bounds boundary was. Had some juggling catches in the end zone, but was so close to making me look like a fool. And then down the stretch, he was awesome. And I just wonder if what we saw early in the season was him coming off an extended layoff. And now he goes to Tennessee and they say, we're putting him in the Jamar Chase role. I just think that we're going to get a better season from Calvin Ridley this year than we did last year. And it seems like the consensus has gone completely the opposite direction.
I'm with you on that, Heath, with the exception of one thing. I'm very situation based, and I have little to no faith at all in Will Levis, despite everything they've put around him. And they've put almost a perfect situation around him, from play caller to offensive line coach with his dad, with Brian Callahan coming in, with Bill Callahan coming in. But I hated his tape at Kentucky. I didn't like his tape from last year, besides the first game when no one had tape on, when no defense coordinators had film on him. So I just don't buy Will Levis, and it really hurts me because if I'm not hitting with Trevor Lawrence, I find it harder to believe he's going to hit with Will Levis. Though I do believe he'll be a better individual player, if that makes sense.
So I do think that the Will Levis thing, there's different types of bad quarterbacks.
Okay,
and I could be wrong about this, but my perception, Mike, is that the Will Levis bad quarterback is much better for his pass catchers than the Daniel Jones bad quarterback. Like, Levis is going to probably throw way too many interceptions, and he's going to miss some throws by a mile. But I still think that there's going to be he's going to get the ball out, and he's going to give his wide receivers an opportunity to make a play.
I 100% agree. Will Levis has.
I would disagree with that. So this would be a better debate for another day.
Perfect. We'll have to come back. But I see Will Levis as a kind of guy that when he's sitting in the pocket, the reason that we don't like the tape is because he seems almost like ignorance is bliss. He doesn't know what's going on around him, so he'll just take hits and not really worry about it. He'll be throwing with defenders laced all over him. So I see him in a situation where he's going to give his receivers more opportunities and just kind of chuck it. And between D-Hop and Ridley, you have two guys that can go up and get it. Daniel Jones, if he's going back to pass and he feels pressure, he does the opposite thing. He just kind of takes off, panics a little bit, looks jittery. So I'd rather have the guy that's going to stand back there and not know what's happening and just chuck it anyway than the guy that's going to cave and not know what to do.
I completely agree with that side of it, just to make it clear.
Yeah.
I just don't believe at all that Will Levis is that quarterback. I think he's going to be even slower processor than Jones and take a ton of sacks and not stay on time at all on the offense. And I don't even think it's going to be just an issue of accuracy and, kind of the scattershot side of it. I think it's more an issue of he will be a really slow processor, because that's what he was last year. The ball didn't get out. It didn't get out on time. And he averaged a lot of those games he was averaging, under 200 yards passing. Even if you look back at his final year at Kentucky, you'd be stunned to see the game logs from his final year at Kentucky and how few yards he passed for there.
You got to go 2 years back at Kentucky when he was playing in a competent system and he had receivers that could help. I would take a long time to process too if I was thrown to N'Keal Westbrook-Akine and Treylon Burks.
It could be the issue.
I love the fact that 55 minutes into this podcast, we find the point of it's the Will Levis.
There it is.
The Will Levis debate. Mike, thank you so much for being here. Tell everybody once again where they can find your work.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. Thanks to everybody that was listening. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. You can find me at the Fantasy Football RPG podcast. Just look for dragons and dungeons and stuff. And then you can also find me. I'm an editor at Last Word on Sports. So if you're looking for written content and rankings, that's where you can find it.
I've always said, Mike, one day I want to play Dungeons and Dragons. So maybe you can make that happen. It's always been something I wanted to give a shot to.
I'll set one up for you and Heath.
Okay, nice.
Thank you for being here once again. Dan, thank you for everybody who participated in the chat, who's listening on the podcast. If you want to know more about this draft, there will be an article on CBS Sports later today on Friday with a full breakdown and all of the results. To the rest of you, we will talk to you on Tuesday.